Hi guys, so for week 6 I decided to do the case brief on naming victims of sexual assault. And in this case brief, the basic rundown was that if a kid has been kidnapped and news sources say the kid's name to try to get the kid found as quick as possible, and then later when the kid is found, the kid has been a victim of sexual assault or sexual abuse, do you discontinue saying the kid's name? Do you stop saying the kid's name? Or do you continue? And so the question that I answered was kind of a 2-for-1 question. It was, what do you do? How should the news react after the child has been found to be a sexual assault victim? And do you discontinue the child's name after you find out that information? And to answer the second part first, I said that it would kind of be pointless to discontinue using the child's name. With the way our communication is in today's world, word travels really fast, and the amount of news available to us on the internet, on TV, and the newspapers, magazines, journals, all around us are different ways that we can get our news. And I just think it's unrealistic to think that that child's name will be wiped and no one will remember it. For example, like you can hear of a kidnapping from California that happened yesterday in Virginia today. Like you'll hear about it the very next day, and that's all the way across the United States. And that's just how fast our communication is nowadays. And I do think that it's just impossible to erase that child's name after you've used it, because anyone can type in the new headline. Like, let's say you made a new headline where you left the child's name out of it and you talked about how the child was found, but you didn't say the name. There's so many descriptors of like what the child looks like, where the child was found, where the child went missing, the age of the child, that you could just type in the main points of that article and probably find the original article with the child's name if you just typed it into a Google search. And also, it doesn't help prevent the child from the neighborhood that they live in, or the town or city they live in, from hearing about it. Because when something like that happens, everyone around that location, everyone that lives there, pretty much immediately finds out, from a friend of a friend or from a family member. They find out, and then they all become worried, and it becomes real to them and a big deal. And so even if the child did return home after the child was found, it wouldn't really help them if the news articles and the news and just any news source, if they didn't say the child's name, because where it matters the most is in where that child lives every day, and all of those people that surround that child are still going to know. And so I do think it is pointless. However, I do think that the news, once they find out that, they should be a lot more sensitive to the child, because in the case brief that I read, the second rule of journalism is to cause the least amount of harm as possible. And when you continue to mention that child's name, and right after that child has been found, you list all the gruesome details of that child's most traumatic event of their life, it's just rude, and it's not sensitive to the child's needs, and it's not sensitive to the child's process of healing. And I think that is very unfair that the news, as soon as they find out about this, they will list the child's name, they will list everything that happened, they will go into detail, and they will post it everywhere, and it'll eventually get back to the child, and the child has to relive all of those memories, and has to relive that horrific event that happened to them. And so I believe that that's very unfair to the child, and that the news should basically post an article of a need-to-know basis, or talk about it on TV on a need-to-know basis, by basically saying, this child was found, say the child's name, and then say the kidnapper has been taken into custody or is arrested and being questioned. So that way, that's a need-to-know basis. That's all the people need to know. They now know the child is safe. They know that the kidnapper cannot harm their children or anybody's children they know, or any other person's child in general. And so it just kind of calms the public down. But I don't feel like they need to go into the whole story, especially right after the child has been found. All they need to know is just the basics. And I also think it is very unfair for talk shows and news shows to immediately be like, hey, can we have your child? Can we talk about the events that happened, like right after it happened? You know, you need to give that child time to, they're not even fully processing what happened to them. They're still processing that everything that happened was real. And so I do think that's just rude, and the child should be left alone to heal and be with its family, or be with his or her family. And so I do think that's bad. And however, if the child later on decides that they want to tell their story and they want to make their story known, and I believe that that is perfectly okay, then the child has the right to do that. And I don't just believe it should be based on the parent's consent. I do believe that the child should consent to being able to do this too. It shouldn't just be the parent saying, okay, you're going to do this. The child should say, I'm going to do this, I'm not going to do this as well. So that's the only thing that I could think of how the news could kind of just make it a little bit better and easier for the child. When I was looking into more information about this case brief, I found a couple other articles that were interesting. The most interesting one was when they kind of referred this this particular instance into a bigger picture by saying, you know, a lot of sexual assault victims and sexual abuse victims, whichever you want to call it, when they don't want to speak out because they see the backlash from the media. They see all being posted everywhere, and they don't want everybody to know their business. They don't want everybody to know what happened to them. And they also see the negatives where people say, oh, they were asking for it, or oh, why wasn't someone watching the kid, or oh, you know, how could this have happened, you know, and they always tend to blame the victim in some of these media articles and some of these stories that are going around and the news sources, and that's also unfair to the victim. I do believe that the victim should have their space 100%. And so I do believe that if the news were to take this new approach and just to base their articles on a need to know for this particular instance, it could possibly help and make more sexual assault victims feel more comfortable in coming out and telling their story and say, look, this is what happened to me. I need help. You know, I want to help get the person that did this to me caught. And so I do believe that could help if the news would just tone it down a little bit and maybe not mention the names in that instance, unless they give consent to it, and just say it in the basics and not go into all of the details and make the public question whether the victim was asking for it, or where were the parents of the child when the child was being kidnapped, and all of that. And then another great quote that I found from the same article that I read was, you can't put the cat back into the bag, which is what I was referring to earlier when I said after the child's name is out there, you can't just erase that child's name. It's not going to happen. And it's time consuming. It's a lot of money to try to get all of those news sources to agree and to actually take it down. And so once the cat's out of the bag, you can't put it back in the bag. And so I liked that phrase a lot, because that was a very simple phrase of way of putting this and relating it back to the case brief that I read originally. So those were my opinions on the case brief that I did. It was very interesting. I enjoyed it because originally I would have just said, no, never say the names of sexual assault victims unless they give consent to a news source and say, okay, that's fine. I want to tell my story. But now this special circumstance, you know, it's kind of, I do think it's the lesser two evils, and to not say the child's name. I do think that it is important when a child goes missing to say the child's name. And so it was kind of interesting because you have a little bit of like a moral dilemma, realizing that, oh, there are special instances. It's not always just cut and dry answers. So it was pretty cool. So that's my week 6. Bye.